Angela Torres walked through the revolving glass doors of the 28-story office tower on Wacker Drive at exactly 7 o'clock in the evening. The city of Chicago shimmered outside, drenched in the golden hues of a fading summer sun, but inside, the fluorescent lights had already taken over, sterile and unwelcoming. Angela adjusted her dark blue janitor's uniform, pulled the cart of cleaning supplies behind her, and nodded to the sleepy security guard who barely glanced up from his crossword puzzle. She had worked here for nearly 5 years, and yet, to most who passed through those halls, she remained a ghost, an invisible presence who erased their messes and disappeared before morning. Every night followed a routine as precise as a metronome. Floor by floor, office by office, Angela vacuumed, wiped, disinfected. She kept her headphones in, but rarely played music. Her real focus was always on the details, the names on the whiteboards, the contents of unlocked desk drawers, the timing of overnight emails on computer screens that hadn't logged out properly. She never touched anything that would raise suspicion. She just observed. And later, when she was sure she was alone, she would write. In a battered leather notebook that never left the bottom of her backpack, Angela recorded everything. Names, habits, changes in office assignments, late-night visits by executives who weren't supposed to be there. It wasn't surveillance. It was something more personal. A habit, maybe, or a way of staying connected to a world that had once been hers. She didn't notice Darren right away. He was new, maybe 26, with a nervous smile and shirts that were always slightly too big. He worked for one of the fintech startups on the 18th floor, and unlike the others, he stayed late, not to work. He said it helped him think, staying past 9 when the building was empty. That night, he had come out to refill his water bottle when he saw her. Angela was bent over a desk, eyes fixed not on the surface she was wiping, but on a sticky note taped to a monitor. She read it twice before erasing it. Then she moved on. Darren didn't say anything. But after that, he noticed her more. How she never looked lost. How she always paused in front of the corner office, even when the blinds were drawn. How her gaze, tired but focused, didn't match the way she moved. Too precise, too aware. She wasn't just cleaning. She was reading the room. He started staying later. Not every night, just enough to be casual. Sometimes, he would leave his office door open, pretending to be on the phone just to catch snippets of her conversations with herself. She rarely spoke, but when she did, it was in full sentences, thoughtful, as if she was reciting something, or maybe remembering. One Thursday, close to midnight, Darren left the elevator just as Angela exited the stairwell. Their eyes met. She gave a polite nod. He nodded back. "You're here late," he said. Angela paused. "So are you." She didn't wait for more. She turned left down the hallway and disappeared. But Darren couldn't shake it. Something about her. The way she seemed to study the world like a scientist in disguise. That weekend, he asked around. None of the other employees knew her name. The cleaning company sent different people, they said. But Darren knew that wasn't true. She was always there. Always at the same time. Always watching. So he decided to follow her. The next Monday, Darren packed his bag and left at 10 o'clock. Just like always. But instead of heading home, he waited across the street behind the row of planters near the food court entrance. At 10:30, he saw her exit through the loading dock doors. She didn't carry much. Just her backpack, a small tote, and her cart, which she pushed in the back of a van with no company logo. She locked the vehicle and walked toward Michigan Avenue. She didn't look back. Darren followed from a distance, careful to keep his steps quiet. She moved briskly, head down, until she reached the edge of Grant Park. There, she ducked into a side entrance of the Harold Washington Library. The building was dark, long closed to the public, but a single side door was open. He hesitated. She's cleaning, he thought. Maybe it's another job. But then, 10 minutes later, he saw movement through a second-floor window. The light flicked on in one of the meeting rooms. Angela appeared, not in her uniform anymore, but in a long cardigan and black slacks. She stood tall, with posture that didn't belong to a janitor. 5 teenagers, maybe 6, sat around a table. She greeted them by name. She handed out notebooks. Then she began to speak. Darren moved closer, pressing himself against the outer wall beneath the window. He couldn't hear everything, but her voice carried faintly through the cracked pane above. She wasn't giving instructions. She was teaching. Compare symbolism across both texts. It's not just about what the author intended. It's about what you see, what resonates with your experience. He froze. She sounded like a professor, confident, sharp, like someone who belonged in front of a classroom, not behind a mop. After the session ended, Angela gathered the notebooks, hugged one of the girls who lingered, and turned off the lights. Darren stepped back into the shadows. He watched her exit, wait for a bus, and vanish into the night. The next night, he tried to talk to her. She passed him in the hallway like he wasn't there. "Angela," he said softly, testing her name. She stopped. For a second, her face betrayed something. Recognition, maybe, or fear. "I think you mistaken me for someone else," she said, her voice flat. She turned and walked away. Darren knew then that he had stumbled into something bigger than curiosity. There was a story hidden beneath the fluorescent lights and polished desks. A woman with secrets, truths too heavy for daylight, and he wasn't going to look away. Darren returned to the 18th floor the following evening with a restlessness that had begun to pull at the edges of his concentration. The quiet hum of the office felt heavier now, not because of the work, but because of what he'd seen. Angela, who for years had blended into the sterile backdrop of corporate night shifts, had revealed a fragment of something else, something layered and deliberately concealed, and the way she had dismissed him, without emotion, without even blinking, only deepened his resolve. There was a woman beneath the uniform with the cadence of an educator and the gaze of someone who had nothing left to prove, and he needed to know why she had chosen to live as a ghost in her own story. He started with the basics. Her name wasn't hard to confirm. The building service log included a record of employee rotations. Angela Torres was listed under a third-party contractor used for after-hours cleaning. A few online searches yielded only standard results: a dated LinkedIn profile with no photo, years out of use, an old faculty directory listing from a university in Michigan that had long since been updated. That was the first real surprise. Assistant Professor of Literature, University of Michigan. The listing included a short bio, graduate of the University of Chicago, published essays in modernist narrative structures, an academic focus on Latin American women's literature. None of it aligned with the woman Darren had seen wiping desks on her knees. What happened? Why did she leave? The search deepened. A cached page from an academic forum revealed fragment of debate, the remnant of scandal now nearly buried under the sediment of newer controversies. Angela's name appeared in a discussion thread from almost 10 years ago, centered on a university research grant. The details were sparse, but the tone was familiar. Accusations of data manipulation, an anonymous whistleblower, institutional silence. Darren followed each digital breadcrumb until he reached an article from a local newspaper, dated almost a decade earlier. It reported on the sudden resignation of Professor Angela Torres, following internal allegations of falsifying research funding applications. No charges were filed. No trial, no official investigation, just a quiet disappearance. But one detail in the article stood out. The university refused to release documents related to the inquiry, citing internal confidentiality. Darren leaned back in his chair. His mind raced, connecting the image of the woman teaching homeless teens in a locked library room to the story of an academic who vanished under a cloud of suspicion. The contrast was too sharp to be coincidental. He needed to hear from someone who had known her before the fall. That Friday, he booked a train to Ann Arbor. The university campus felt different in the light of day, full of color and life. But Darren saw it through the lens of what had been lost. A friend from college still worked in administration and helped him secure an alumni library pass, which gave him access to archive faculty records. Angela's file had been flagged as inactive since her resignation, but he found her name in the acknowledgments section of several theses. One name appeared multiple times: Dr. Michael Behrens, her former mentor. He tracked Behrens down to an old building near the edge of campus, where a professor now taught a single seminar per semester. His office smelled of paper and old leather. The man who greeted Darren was thin, silver-haired and cautious, as if he'd learned not to speak easily about things others wanted buried. Darren introduced himself, gave only the most necessary context, and asked about Angela Torres. Behrens didn't respond immediately. Instead, he sat back and studied Darren with a long, silent look. "Why are you asking about her now?" he said finally. Darren chose his words carefully. "Because I think something was taken from her that she never deserved to lose." Behrens sighed, then stood and closed the office door. "She was one of the brightest minds I ever mentored," he said, his voice low, sharp, unflinching, idealistic in a way that never sat well in academic politics. She wasn't content just to do good work. She wanted the system to be clean. And when she discovered it wasn't, she didn't look away. What did she discover? It was a grant, one of the major ones, 7 figures, tied to a pharmaceutical company funding humanities outreach. It was shady from the beginning. Angela found documents, emails, internal memos that suggested the data was being massaged to justify continued funding. She confronted the department chair. Next thing I knew, she was under review for alleged financial misconduct. I tried to help, but by then they built a wall around it, claimed she'd fabricated parts of her own reports. She refused to admit to something she didn't do, and they gave her a choice: resign quietly or face public accusations that would follow her forever. And the documents she found? They disappeared. Behrens walked over to a cabinet and retrieved a manila folder thick with age. "I kept copies of everything she gave me," he said. "I couldn't stop what happened to her, but I couldn't let them destroy the truth completely. I don't know why you're here, Darren, but if you're trying to help her, be careful. These are powerful people, and they protect each other." Darren took the folder with a nod. The pages inside were photocopies, scanned emails, meeting notes, and signed contracts with suspicious amendments. It would take time to piece it all together, but the foundation was there. Angela hadn't been a criminal. She had been a whistleblower, punished for exposing what others wanted hidden. He returned to Chicago that night with a weight pressing against his chest. Angela wasn't just surviving. She was hiding, not out of shame, but out of necessity. Someone had taken everything from her: her name, her profession, even her daughter, as Darren would soon learn when he followed another thread buried in an old faculty union newsletter. After the scandal, custody of Angela's 8-year-old daughter was transferred to relatives in Milwaukee, citing financial instability and reputational risk. Angela never contested it. She disappeared entirely. Back in the office, Angela avoided him with practiced precision. She walked past him in the hall as if he were air. But Darren didn't need to press her. Not yet. What he had learned spoke louder than any confession she could offer. The notebook she carried, the silence, the way she gave herself to teaching street kids under the cover of night. Angela Torres had lost everything, but she had never stopped being who she was. He understood now why she had flinched when he said her name, and why she still kept her head down. Because for people like her, the truth had never been enough to protect them. Darren waited until Friday evening to speak to her again. The office was half-lit, its usual buzz quieted to the low hum of fluorescent lights and the occasional ding of an elevator no one had called. Angela had just started the 19th floor, wheeling her cart toward the glass conference room where executives like to leave coffee cups and half-eaten sandwiches, as if they were disposable traces of a day well spent. She was focused, deliberate in her movements, and Darren knew that if he didn't choose his moment precisely, she would vanish again behind that wall of silence she wore like armor. "I met Dr. Behrens," he said without preamble, standing just far enough behind her that she wouldn't feel cornered. Angela froze mid-step. "I went to Ann Arbor," he added. "He told me everything. Or enough." She remained still for a long moment, her back to him. Then, slowly, she turned around, expression unreadable but no longer entirely blank. "You had no right," she said quietly. "I know," Darren replied, "but I had to understand." Angela's eyes flickered, not with anger, but something heavier. Fatigue, maybe, or the kind of resignation that comes from being betrayed too many times to count. "You think you understand?" she asked, voice brittle. "Because a retired professor gave you pieces of a story?" "No, but I want to." Angela exhaled, then gestured toward the office behind her. This place, you think it's just a job I ended up with? You think any of this was a choice? Darren didn't answer. She wasn't really asking. I cleaned floors for strangers while my name was erased from classrooms I built, she continued. I taught entire generations of students, published papers that were used in grant proposals I never touched, and when I raised one question, when I saw one thing that didn't make sense and asked about it, they decided I didn't exist anymore. The words hung in the air like dust unsettled by light. Darren watched her closely. You weren't erased. You were buried. Angela gave a half laugh, dry, joyless. Same thing, if no one's willing to dig. She didn't invite him to say more, and she didn't walk away either. That, Darren realized, was something, maybe not trust, but the space before it. The kind of silence that asked to be filled with something real. I found more, he said, softening his tone. There's a grant summary buried in the faculty union records. And court documents. Custody hearings from a year after you left. Angela's face didn't change, but her posture did. Her shoulders stiffened, and her hands curled slightly at her sides. That's not your place. I know, but I'm not trying to use it against you. I think your story matters, and someone needs to hear it. She shook her head, almost imperceptibly. Stories like mine don't get told, not without being rewritten. Angela turned and resumed wiping the glass table in the conference room. For a moment, Darren thought the conversation was over, but as she moved, her voice returned, softer now. Do you know why I started teaching those kids? She asked without looking at him. He shook his head, though she couldn't see him. They remind me of who I was before all this. Before I believed that justice was inevitable if you just worked hard enough. They don't believe in justice. They believe in surviving. And they come every week, not because they think it'll save them, but because it gives them a moment of feeling human again. Darren walked to the doorway of the conference room, stopping just short of stepping inside. There's one girl, Angela continued, still not meeting his eyes. Jasmine, 17. She was on track to get her GED, maybe even a scholarship through a reentry program. Last week, she missed 2 sessions. I called shelters. No one had seen her. Yesterday, I got a call. She's been detained. Why? They say possession with intent to distribute. But it's not true. She doesn't use. She's terrified of that world. I know her. Angela paused, the rag in her hand motionless. She was carrying a bag that didn't belong to her. Her boyfriend left it in her locker at the center. She didn't even open it. Security found it. They called the cops. The lawyer says it's weak evidence. But the system doesn't care. She's at a record already. One more charge and she'll be processed as an adult. Darren felt something shift in the air, like the first drop of a coming storm. Can I help? He asked. Angela hesitated. I thought about calling someone, she said. A man who used to be a friend. He was a junior administrator when I left. Now he's vice provost. He's the one who handed me the ultimatum all those years ago. I've avoided him for almost a decade, but he can make a phone call, quietly, get her case reevaluated, maybe even dropped. She turned to face Darren fully for the first time since he arrived. But if I call him, I owe him. He'll want something, and that something will mean letting him control my silence again. You can't go back to hiding, Darren said. I never stopped, she replied. But this girl, she still has a future. I can't let her lose it like I lost mine. Darren nodded, then stepped into the room, slowly, as if afraid to shatter the fragile bridge forming between them. I'll go with you, he said. You don't have to face him alone. Angela didn't smile, but something in her eyes softened, if only slightly. Be careful, Darren, she said. They know how to bury people, and they're good at making the world forget we ever existed. The following morning, Angela made the call. They met the vice provost, now a sleek, polished man with 2 white teeth and an expression rehearsed over years of negotiation, in a quiet cafe just outside campus. He greeted her with a kind of guarded warmth, like someone tried to appear benevolent while still protecting his own name. It's been a long time, Angela, he said, sipping his espresso. I heard you left the city. I didn't, she replied flatly. I was erased from it. He chuckled awkwardly. That's not how I remember it. No, I'm sure it's not. The conversation was transactional from the start. Angela explained the situation with Jasmine, gave names, dates, the location of the shelter, the name of the arresting officer. The vice provost listened, nodded, took notes. And what do you want me to do? He asked. I want you to make a phone call. Not to cover up a crime. Just make sure the truth isn't buried under someone's assumptions. And in exchange? Angela stared at him, her voice low and clear. Nothing, except that you remember this. That you had a chance to do something right, and you took it. The man seemed surprised, maybe even disappointed. He agreed, promised discretion, promised to look into it. When they left, Angela didn't speak until they reached the parking lot. He'll do it, she said, not because he cares, but because it gives him leverage in case I ever resurface. Are you going to? Angela looked out over the highway beyond the trees. Her fingers tightened around the strap of her bag. I might not have a choice anymore. The story broke on a quiet Tuesday morning, beginning as a brief segment at the tail end of a local news broadcast. Former university professor reemerges to fight for detained teen, the anchor read, her voice smooth and practiced, unaware of the weight those words carried. A still image of Angela, taken during her years at the University of Michigan, appeared on the screen. She was younger in the photo, full of composure and conviction, the kind of person viewers might mistake for someone who'd chosen to disappear rather than someone forced into silence. By noon, the story had spread, picked up by regional outlets hungry for human drama, especially the kind wrapped in academic scandal and institutional betrayal. A woman fallen from grace who returned not to reclaim her past but to protect someone else. It was irresistible. Angela watched it unfold not from her apartment or the shelter or even the library where she still taught in secret, but from the break room on the 14th floor of the office tower she had cleaned for half a decade. Someone had left the television on. She didn't flinch when her name came up. She just stood there, holding a bottle of disinfectant in one hand and a rag in the other, her back straight, her face still. It was happening. There was no taking it back now. Darren had done what she asked. He sent the documents to a trusted journalist from an independent investigative outlet. He gave them the paper trail Barons had kept, the university emails, the redacted memos, the financial breakdowns. But he hadn't done it alone. Angela had finally agreed to be named. No aliases, no off-the-record quotes. She gave a recorded interview, plain and direct, without emotion or embellishment. She told him how the grant manipulation had unfolded, how she was blamed, and how she walked away because the alternative was being torn apart in public. She gave them everything she had buried for nearly 10 years. The cost of silence had finally outweighed the comfort it provided. The backlash came just as fast as the support. By Wednesday evening, Angela's name was trending locally on social media platforms, split between admiration and outrage. Some called her brave. Others painted her as manipulative, attention-seeking, opportunistic. Academics debated her credibility, citing vague, discredited reports from nearly a decade ago. Others pointed to her current job, a janitor, not a scholar, as if that negated everything she had once accomplished. But buried beneath the noise, one voice emerged that mattered more than any other. Jasmine's case had been reopened. The vice provost's quiet favor had sparked a second look at the arrest. Combined with pressure from the media and the emergence of testimony from other girls in the program, it was enough to push the district attorney's office into motion. Within 48 hours, Jasmine was released under supervised probation, pending the final evaluation of the evidence. Angela waited outside the juvenile detention center, wearing the same cardigan she always wore during lessons. Jasmine ran into her arms without a word. That moment marked a shift, both visible and internal. Angela could no longer retreat into the anonymity that had shielded her for years. Her name was out there. Her face, her voice, her past. None of it could be contained anymore. She received calls from advocacy groups, from journalists, even from former students who had no idea where she had gone until now. Some apologized. Some didn't. Offers began to arrive. Guest lectures, panel discussions, even a potential book deal. But Angela turned them all down, not out of bitterness, but necessity. She wasn't ready to be defined again by a system that had once stripped her bare. Still, something had shifted in her. She no longer walked through the office halls with her head down. Her eyes met those around her, calm and unflinching. Darren noticed it first. One evening, as they stood by the service elevator, he looked at her and said, "You don't walk like you're hiding anymore." Angela considered that. "I'm not hiding," she replied, "but I'm not done fighting either." It was a week later when the university issued a statement, carefully worded naturally, acknowledging the resurfaced documents, promising an internal review, expressing regret that certain procedures may not have been properly followed. They never apologized directly. They never admitted guilt. But the language was clear enough to those who knew how institutions protect themselves. It was a concession, subtle and strategic, but a concession nonetheless. The article that Darren wrote was different. He submitted it to an independent magazine known for its long-form investigative pieces. It didn't sensationalize. It didn't reduce Angela to a tragic figure or a martyr. It was personal, structured like a quiet confession, his own, in a way. He wrote about how he'd first noticed her not because of what she did, but because of the way she moved through spaces people refused to see. He wrote about the weight of hidden labor, of knowledge buried under prejudice, of systems designed to erase those who refuse to conform. And most of all, he wrote about the courage it takes to speak again after being silenced. Angela read the article twice. She didn't comment on it, didn't praise or critique, but she left a copy of it folded neatly in her notebook, tucked between lesson plans and handwritten essays from her students. That was how Darren knew she approved. Then came the letter. It arrived at her apartment, addressed by hand, no return address. Angela recognized the handwriting instantly, though it had matured. Her heart stilled as she read the name. Marisol, her daughter. She sat at the kitchen table, the envelope trembling in her hands, and opened it slowly, as if the words inside might vanish if she rushed them. It was short, but unmistakably hers. "I saw you on TV. I didn't know what to think at first. They told me you'd left because you didn't want me anymore, but I never forgot your voice. I want to talk. I want to see you." There was a phone number scribbled at the bottom. Angela stared at it for a long time, her eyes burning but dry. Then, without hesitation, she picked up the phone. "Marisol?" she said, when the voice on the other end answered. There was silence, then a shaky breath. "Hi, Mom." Angela closed her eyes. For the first time in years, she let herself cry. Angela stood outside the corner cafe in Logan Square, her hands wrapped tightly around a paper cup of tea she had barely sipped. The breeze carried a late summer warmth, but she barely felt it. Her nerves buzzed beneath the surface of her skin. Not with fear exactly, but with a quiet, bracing tension that had settled into her since the phone call. In the days that followed the letter from Marisol, Angela had replayed their brief conversation again and again, analyzing the tone, the pauses, the fragility in her daughter's voice. It had been 10 years, 10 full years since she had last seen her child's face, heard her laugh, or whispered a good night. 10 years since the judge's gavel had fallen, not with malice, but with indifference, shifting custody on the grounds that instability was no place to raise a child. No one had asked Angela if being erased professionally meant she stopped being a mother. They had simply decided it for her. Marisol had chosen the cafe, a neutral place, public, unthreatening. Angela arrived early, too early, and sat by the window, staring at her own reflection in the glass until it blurred into the crowd behind her. She watched every figure that passed, wondering if she would recognize her daughter after so much time. The last image she had held on to was of a child, 8 years old, braces on her front teeth, always carrying a tattered library book under her arm. Now she was 18, possibly taller, certainly changed. But when the door opened and a young woman stepped inside, Angela knew instantly. It was in the eyes, dark, steady, searching. Her own mirrored. Marisol walked over with uncertain steps, her arms wrapped around herself. She wore a black hoodie, simple jeans, and her hair was pulled back in a careless knot. She looked like someone who was trying not to be noticed and failing because of the intensity of her presence. Angela stood up slowly, unsure whether to reach out. She didn't. "Hi," Marisol said, her voice low. "Hi," Angela replied, almost breathless. They sat. For a moment, neither spoke. The silence between them wasn't hostile, just unfamiliar, fragile like the thin layer of ice on a winter pond. Angela wanted to say 100 things, wanted to fill the space with apologies, explanations, stories, but she knew it wasn't the time. "I read the article," Marisol said after a while. "The one that guy wrote." "Darren?" Angela nodded. "I didn't understand everything in it," Marisol continued. "But I saw you. Really saw you. Not like how they talked about you back then." Angela tightened her grip on the cup. "What do they say?" "That you'd been fired. That you'd disappeared. Some said you ran away. Others said you'd done something bad and didn't want to face it. But no one ever said that they forced you out." Angela's throat closed for a second. "I tried to explain once. I sent letters. But I think they never got to you. I didn't know what to believe for a long time," Marisol admitted. "I was angry, confused. I thought if you wanted to find me, you would have..." Angela looked down. "I wanted to, every day, but I was told I had nothing to offer you. No job, no home, no voice that anyone would listen to. They made me invisible, and I thought maybe you were better off without that version of me." Marisol's expression cracked just slightly. "But I wasn't. I needed you. Even if you were struggling. Even if you were angry or scared or quiet. I just needed you." Angela reached across the table slowly, giving her time to pull away. Marisol didn't. Their hands touched, fingers brushing, then holding, and the weight of 10 years of silence passed between them. "I don't know if we can just go back," Angela said. "I don't even know where we begin." "We don't go back," Marisol said. "We go forward." It was the first time Angela felt the sensation of hope not as a concept, but as something tangible, a shift in the air, a softening of something rigid in her chest. They stayed there for over an hour, talking in starts and stops. Marisol spoke about her schooling, her dreams of becoming a writer, her anger at the world that had lied to her. Angela listened more than she spoke, answering questions only when asked, never pressing. They agreed to meet again, to take things slowly, not to force what would take time to rebuild. And when they parted, Marisol hugged her mother tightly, whispering, "I'm glad you didn't give up." That same week, Angela received another call, this time from a community nonprofit operating out of South Side, focused on education access for underserved teens. They had seen the coverage, read the article, and wanted to invite her to lead a pilot literacy program. It wasn't a full-time job. The pay was modest. But it was official. It was public. It was hers. Angela visited the center the following day. The building was modest but bright, with posters of authors on the walls and books stacked in crates waiting to be shelved. She met the staff, most of them volunteers, and walked through the classrooms, small, quiet, full of possibility. The director, a woman named Patrice, offered her a desk, a set of keys, and full freedom to design the curriculum. "You come with fire," Patrice said. "We need that here." Angela accepted the offer. In the evenings, she still cleaned offices. She could have quit by then, but she chose not to. Part of it was financial, bills, rent, stability. But part of it was something deeper. Cleaning had become a kind of ritual, not a punishment, but a reclamation. She wasn't invisible anymore, and so the act of wiping down glass walls and empty desks now felt like something she was choosing, not something imposed. And there was power in that. Darren visited her new classroom one afternoon, standing quietly at the back while she led a writing exercise with 4 teens sprawled across bean bags and plastic chairs. When the lesson ended, he walked up with a small smile. "They listen to you," he said. "They listen because I see them," Angela replied. He handed her a folded newspaper, another feature, this time in a larger publication, tracing the ripple effects of her story. Universities were under pressure to reevaluate whistleblower policies. Angela's old department had quietly removed certain faculty from their administrative roles. No apologies were issued, but shifts were happening. Angela didn't care much for the press. She only clipped out the article for Marisol, tucked it into an envelope, a note that said, "So you'll know what the truth looks like, even when they try to bury it." Jasmine started working at the center a month after her release, helping organize books, assist younger students with math, and coordinate transportation with the shelters. She never spoke much about her time in detention, but her presence was steady, her trust in Angela unshaken. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the skyline and the city lights began to flicker on, Angela stood by the window of her apartment, watching the streets below. She held a steaming mug of coffee, her phone resting on the table behind her. Marisol's text glowed on the screen, small, casual updates about her day. Angela read them slowly, smiling, letting herself absorb the ordinary miracle of having her daughter back in her life. She wasn't healed. The past still lived within her, but she was no longer buried beneath it. She was seen, she was known, and more importantly, she remembered who she was. Not because others finally acknowledged it, but because she had refused to forget